At 03:16 hours on October 25, 1944, the Mark 8 fire control radar aboard USS West Virginia detected targets at 42,000 yards, 24 statute miles. The radar operators saw returns on their scopes, large contacts. Moving north through Surigao Strait toward Leyte Gulf, Japanese battleships, Captain Herbert Victor Wiley ordered battle stations. The fire control computers began calculations: range, bearing, target speed, projectile time of flight, wind velocity. The Mark 8 rangekeeper, an analog mechanical computer, processed the data and generated a firing solution. At 03:52 hours, West Virginia unleashed her 8 16-inch 50 caliber guns. Range, 22,800 yards, 12.9 statute miles. The shells arced through the pitch-black night. Time of flight, approximately 50 seconds. The first salvo struck the Japanese battleship Yamashiro. Direct hits. West Virginia fired 16 salvos over the next 21 minutes. 93 16-inch shells, 49.5 tons of armor-piercing steel. Yamashiro burned, listed, and at 04:19 hours capsized and sank. This was revenge. 3 years earlier, on December 7, 1941, West Virginia had been moored at Pearl Harbor. Japanese torpedoes struck her port side. 7 hits. She sank to the harbor bottom in 40 feet of water. 106 men died. Her captain, Mervyn Sharp Bennion, was killed on the bridge by bomb fragments. The battleship was abandoned. Her fires burned for 24 hours. She sat on the bottom, flooded and destroyed, while the Pacific Fleet burned around her. Now she led the American battle line at Surigao Strait, modernized, equipped with the most advanced radar fire control in the world. Firing at targets she could not see with accuracy, Japanese gunners could not match. She was the first American battleship to open fire in the last battleship surface action in history, and she was destroying the same enemy that had tried to destroy her. This is the story of USS West Virginia, the battleship that died at Pearl Harbor and rose from the harbor bottom to exact vengeance. The ship that was salvaged, rebuilt, modernized, and returned to lead the battle line. The warship that demonstrated American industrial capacity, salvage expertise, and determination. She was sunk, she was raised, she was transformed, and she was present when Japan surrendered. The story begins not with resurrection but with death. At 07:55 hours on December 7, 1941, West Virginia was moored outboard of USS Tennessee at Berth Fox 6. The two battleships lay together along the southeast side of Ford Island. West Virginia's port side faced open water. Tennessee's starboard side was against the quay. The water depth beneath West Virginia's keel was 40 feet. This would prove critical. The first wave of Japanese carrier aircraft appeared at 07:53 hours. Torpedo bombers approached from the south. West Virginia's port side was completely exposed. The first torpedo struck at approximately 07:57 hours. The explosion tore a hole in the hull near frame 50. Water poured in. Additional torpedoes followed in rapid succession. Frame 65, frame 90, frame 105, frame 120. The explosions were catastrophic. Each torpedo carried an 873-pound warhead. The blasts ripped open the hull plating and demolished internal compartments. Captain Bennion was on the bridge observing the attack. At approximately 085 hours, a bomb struck the nearby USS Tennessee. The explosion sent fragments across the water. Shrapnel struck Bennion in the abdomen. The wound was mortal. He remained conscious and continued giving orders. Lieutenant Commander Thomas Terrence Beatty and Communications Officer Lieutenant Ricketts supported him while he bled to death. Bennion refused morphine. He wanted to remain alert. He died at approximately 0810 hours. He would receive the Medal of Honor posthumously. Below decks, the torpedo damage was overwhelming. The explosions had demolished the port blister compartments designed to absorb torpedo hits. The armored belt had been penetrated in multiple locations. Flooding spread throughout the port side. The ship began listing heavily to port. Within minutes, the list reached 28 degrees. West Virginia was capsizing. Lieutenant Commander John Silas Harper, the damage control officer, made the critical decision: counter-flooding. Open valves on the starboard side. Flood compartments deliberately. Add weight to starboard to counter the port list. This would sink the ship deeper but prevent capsizing. Harper gave the orders: Damage control parties opened valves. Water rushed into starboard compartments. The list slowed. The ship settled lower. By 0810 hours, West Virginia had settled onto the harbor bottom on an even keel. The list was corrected to approximately 5 degrees. She remained upright. Had Harper not ordered counter-flooding, West Virginia would have capsized, like USS Oklahoma. Most of the crew would have been trapped below. The death toll would have exceeded 600. Instead, most crew escaped. Harper's decision saved hundreds of lives, but West Virginia was destroyed. The ship sat on the bottom. Water filled most compartments below the main deck. Fires burned throughout the superstructure. Fuel oil from ruptured tanks spread across the harbor. The fires reached the oil. Flames engulfed the stern. Ammunition began exploding. Secondary batteries cooked off. 5-inch shells detonated spontaneously. The ship had to be abandoned. At approximately 0900 hours, the surviving crew evacuated. They climbed down lines to boats waiting alongside. Some jumped into the harbor and swam to shore. The wounded were lowered carefully. The dead were left aboard. Rescue parties would recover them later. By 0930 hours, West Virginia was abandoned. Fires continued burning. Salvage parties returned later that afternoon. They brought fire hoses and pumps. The garbage lighter. Yellow Gulf. 17 remained alongside despite exploding ammunition. Her crew played water on the fires. By December 8th, the fires were extinguished. But the damage was done. Initial surveys assessed 7 torpedo hits. Examination on May 17, 1942 revealed a 6th hit. Further inspection in dry dock on June 9th revealed a 7th hit. All 7 torpedoes had struck the port side. The hits were distributed from bow to stern. Frame 48, frame 60, frame 78, frame 97, frame 110, frame 125, frame 146. The entire port side was perforated. Additionally, 1 torpedo had struck the rudder. The steering gear was destroyed. West Virginia could not steer, even if the propulsion plant could be restarted. 2 bombs had also struck. The first was a 15-inch armor-piercing shell converted to a bomb. It penetrated the superstructure deck near Turret 2 and detonated in the casemate spaces. Secondary explosions of 5-inch ammunition stored there caused extensive fires. The second bomb struck the roof of Turret 3. It penetrated but failed to detonate. The impact destroyed one of the 3 16-inch guns in the turret. The bomb also destroyed the Vought Observation Scout 2 Kingfisher floatplane mounted on the catapult atop the turret. Casualty figures were devastating. 106 killed, 52 wounded. Among the dead was Captain Bennion, Lieutenant Commander Leroy Heron Harper, the damage control officer who saved the ship. Survived the attack, but died of a heart attack 6 months later. He was 42. Stress from salvage operations reportedly contributed. He received no medal. His name appears on no memorial, but he saved West Virginia. The salvage operation began immediately. Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard assigned a nucleus crew to West Virginia. Their mission was to pump out the ship, patch the torpedo holes, and refloat her. The work was monumental. 7 torpedo holes measured approximately 20 feet by 30 feet each. Total breached area exceeded 4,000 square feet. The holes had to be covered with temporary patches before pumping could begin. Divers entered the flooded compartments. They worked in darkness using only hand tools and underwater lamps. The water was contaminated with fuel oil. Visibility was near zero. Bodies floated in the water. The divers recovered remains when possible but focused on salvage. They fabricated patches from timber and steel plate. The patches were positioned over torpedo holes from inside the ship. Concrete was poured around the edges to seal them. This process took months, 7 patches, each requiring diving work in darkness inside a flooded wreck. While patching proceeded, pumping began. Portable pumps removed water from compartments. As water levels dropped, additional areas became accessible. Salvage parties entered flooded spaces and cleared debris. They removed furniture, equipment, ammunition, and supplies. Everything had to come out before the ship could be refloated. The work was exhausting. Crews worked 12-hour shifts. The compartments were dark, cramped, and dangerous. Bulkheads weakened by explosions could collapse. Decks could give way. The risk was constant. During pumping operations, salvage parties made a horrific discovery. 66 bodies were found in sealed compartments. Some men had survived the attack and initial flooding. They retreated to air pockets in the void spaces behind the armor belt and in double-bottom tanks. They had access to emergency rations and fresh water stored for such contingencies. They survived for days, perhaps 2 weeks. A calendar was found, scratched on a bulkhead. The last date crossed off was December 23rd, 16 days after the attack. The men had survived that long, but oxygen eventually ran out. They suffocated. By the time salvage parties reached them, they had been dead for months. This discovery haunted the salvage crews. The knowledge that men had survived, trapped in darkness, slowly suffocating, while salvage work proceeded above them, was unbearable. Some bodies were found with notes written to family. Others had written messages on bulkheads. The salvage parties recovered the remains with appropriate ceremony. But the psychological toll was significant. Everyone involved knew that faster salvage might have saved those men. But faster salvage was impossible given the extent of damage. The trapped sailors could not have been reached in time regardless of effort. Their deaths were inevitable once the ship sank. On May 17, 1942, 5 months after the attack, West Virginia was refloated. Pumps had removed water from most compartments. The temporary patches held. The ship rose from the bottom. She floated on an even keel. She was towed to Pearl Harbor Dry Dock No. 1. She entered dry dock on June 9th. The full extent of damage was revealed for the first time. The entire port side was destroyed. Armor plates were torn. Frames were bent. Plating was buckled. The torpedo defense system had been penetrated completely. The inner hull was breached in 7 locations. Repairing such damage at Pearl Harbor was impossible. Temporary repairs would make her seaworthy enough to reach the mainland. Permanent reconstruction required facilities unavailable in Hawaii. Shipyard workers began temporary repairs. The goal was watertight integrity. Replace damaged hull plates, shore up weakened frames, install new pumps, make her seaworthy enough for the transit to Puget Sound. No attempt was made to restore combat capability. The guns remained inoperative. The propulsion plant was dried and preserved, but not tested. The ship would be towed if necessary, but if possible she would transit under her own power. This would free tugs for other duties. Work continued through March 1943. On April 7th, West Virginia departed Pearl Harbor under her own power. The turboelectric propulsion plant was operational. 2 of 4 screws turned. Speed was limited to 12 knots, but she moved. The ship steamed east, escorted by destroyers. She arrived at Puget Sound Navy Yard in Bremerton, Washington on May 1st, 1943, 17 months after being sunk. Now permanent reconstruction would begin. The Navy had debated reconstruction policy since December 1941. 5 battleships had been sunk at Pearl Harbor. Arizona was a total loss. Oklahoma capsized and was refloated but too damaged to repair. California, West Virginia, and Nevada could be salvaged and repaired. But the question was how much to modernize them. Simply restoring them to pre-war condition was possible, but this would return 20-year-old ships with obsolete systems to service. Alternatively, complete reconstruction could create modern battleships, but this would take years and consume resources. Admiral Ernest Joseph King, Commander-in-Chief United States Fleet, convened a board in December 1941 to evaluate options. The board recommended complete modernization, new anti-aircraft batteries, improved fire control, radar systems, wider hulls with bulges to restore stability after weight additions, strengthened decks to resist bombs. The recommendations were approved. West Virginia, California, and Tennessee, which had been damaged but not sunk, would receive complete reconstructions. The work would transform them into the most modern battleships in the fleet. West Virginia's reconstruction at Puget Sound consumed 15 months. The shipyard essentially rebuilt the ship. The old cage masts that had characterized pre-war battleships were removed completely. New tower superstructures were erected. The 2 funnels were replaced with a single funnel integrated into the superstructure. The casemate, 5-inch 25 caliber guns were removed. New 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose guns in twin turrets were installed. 8 turrets, 16 guns. These weapons could engage both surface targets and aircraft. The anti-aircraft battery was massively upgraded. 40mm Bofors guns and quadruple mounts were installed. 20mm Oerlikon cannons were distributed throughout the ship. The final configuration included 40mm guns and 50-20mm guns. This firepower could engage multiple aircraft simultaneously. The lessons of air attacks at Pearl Harbor, Coral Sea, Midway, and countless other engagements had been learned. Modern battleships needed massive anti-aircraft capability. The fire control system was completely replaced. The Mark 8 fire control radar was installed. This was the most advanced naval radar in the world, operating at centimetric wavelength. The Mark 8 could detect surface targets at 44,000 yards. More importantly, it could determine range and bearing with exceptional accuracy. Range accuracy was plus or minus 25 yards. Bearing accuracy was 0.1 degrees. This precision enabled radar-directed gunfire at night or in poor visibility. The Mark 8 connected to the Mark 8 Rangekeeper, an analog fire control computer. Together, they created a system that could engage targets the gunners could not see. The hull was widened. External bulges were welded to both sides. These bulges increased beam from 108 feet to 114 feet. They provided additional torpedo protection. They increased displacement. They restored stability margins that had been lost when top weight from new equipment was added. The bulges made West Virginia wider than the Panama Canal locks. She could not transit between Atlantic and Pacific. She was committed permanently to whichever ocean she operated in. This was accepted. Most battleships were too wide for the canal after wartime modifications. The propulsion plant was completely overhauled. 8. Babcock and Wilcox boilers were retubed. 4. General Electric turbo-electric drive units were disassembled, cleaned, and reassembled. The electrical generation equipment was modernized. The propulsion system developed 100,000 shaft horsepower. Maximum speed was 21 knots. This was slower than fast battleships like Iowa at 33 knots. But West Virginia was a standard-type battleship. She was never designed for high speed. Her role was shore bombardment and battle line engagement. 21 knots was adequate. The armor scheme was unchanged. Belt armor remained 12.1 inches, tapering to 13.5 inches. Turret faceplates were 18 inches. Barbettes were 17.3 inches forward and 13.5 inches aft. Deck armor ranged from 3.6 inches over magazines to 2.5 inches over machinery. This protection was adequate against cruiser gunfire and medium-caliber shell fire. It would not withstand battleship shells at close range, but it did not need to. West Virginia would engage at long range using radar fire control. Enemy battleships without radar would be destroyed before they could close to effective range. On July 2, 1944, West Virginia departed Puget Sound for sea trials. She looked nothing like the battleship that had sunk at Pearl Harbor. The cage masts were gone. The superstructure was modern and streamlined. The anti-aircraft battery bristled from every angle. The ship displaced 45,000 tons fully loaded. She was 6,000 tons heavier than her original displacement. She was wider. She drew more water. But she was immeasurably more capable. Sea trials continued through July. Gunnery practice, engineering tests, radar calibration, damage control drills. By the end of July, West Virginia was declared ready for combat operations. She sailed for Hawaii on September 14th. She arrived Pearl Harbor, September 24th. 33 months after sinking at Pearl Harbor, West Virginia returned as an operational warship. The crew assembled on the fantail. The same flag that had flown on December 7, 1941, was raised. The ship that had died was reborn. On October 6, 1944, West Virginia departed Pearl Harbor as part of Task Group 77.2. 6 battleships: West Virginia, Maryland, Mississippi, Tennessee, California, Pennsylvania. 5 of these ships had been at Pearl Harbor. 4 had been sunk or damaged. They were veterans of Pearl Harbor. They were sailing to the Philippines to destroy the Japanese fleet. The symbolism was intentional. Ships that Japan had tried to destroy would now destroy Japan. On October 19th, the task group arrived off late. West Virginia began shore bombardment of Japanese positions. Her 16-inch guns fired on targets identified by spotters ashore. The bombardment continued for 2 days. At midnight on October 24th, intelligence reported Japanese surface forces approaching. Admiral Jesse Barrett Oldendorf, commanding the fire support group, ordered his forces into battle disposition. West Virginia took position at the head of the battle line. Oldendorf's plan was simple: deploy the 6 battleships across the northern exit of Surigao Strait. Position cruisers on both flanks. Deploy destroyers and PT boats in the strait to attack with torpedoes. When Japanese forces attempted to exit the strait, the battle line would cross their T. This meant the American battleships could fire full broadsides while the Japanese could only fire forward guns. It was the classic battleship tactic. Naval commanders had studied it for generations. Few had achieved it in actual combat. Oldendorf would achieve it perfectly. At 0300 hours, October 25th, PT boats detected Japanese forces entering Surigao Strait from the south. Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura commanded the southern force. 2 battleships, Fuso and Yamashiro, 1 heavy cruiser, Mogami, 4 destroyers. Nishimura's mission was to penetrate Leyte Gulf and attack American amphibious forces. He expected to coordinate with Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force attacking from the north. But Kurita had been delayed. Nishimura was attacking alone. He was sailing into a trap. At 0305 hours, American destroyers launched torpedoes. Multiple hits struck Fuso. She broke in 2. The forward half sank immediately. The aft half remained afloat and burning. 2 Japanese destroyers were sunk. A third was damaged. Nishimura pressed on with Yamashiro, Mogami, and 1 destroyer. He had no choice. Retreating would be dishonorable. He continued north into the guns of the American battle line. At 0316 hours, West Virginia's Mark 8 radar detected Nishimura's remaining forces at 42,000 yards. The range closed steadily. The fire control computers tracked the targets. At 30,000 yards, West Virginia achieved a firing solution. The rangekeeper calculated bearing, elevation, and time of flight. The 16-inch guns trained and elevated automatically. Captain Wiley waited. Oldendorf had specified engagement range of approximately 20,000 yards. Let them close. At 0352 hours, range 22,800 yards, West Virginia opened fire. All 8 16-inch guns fired simultaneously. The recoil drove the ship sideways. The muzzle blast illuminated the night. Spotters using radar observed the fall of shot. The first salvo hit. Yamashiro was struck by multiple 16-inch armor-piercing shells. The shells penetrated her superstructure and detonated. Fires erupted. West Virginia fired again, and again. 16 salvos, approximately 90 seconds per salvo. 93 shells total. At 0354 hours, California and Tennessee joined the bombardment. California fired 14-inch guns. Tennessee fired 14-inch guns. The combined fire was devastating. Yamashiro was hit repeatedly. Shells penetrated her armor. Magazines detonated. Fires spread throughout the ship. She lost steering. She slowed. At 0400 hours, Yamashiro turned to retreat. It was too late. American shells continued striking. Her list increased. At 0419 hours, she capsized and sank. Approximately 1,200 men died. Fewer than 10 survived. The Battle of Surigao Strait lasted 27 minutes of battleship gunfire. West Virginia fired 16 salvos. California fired 63 14-inch shells. Tennessee fired 69 14-inch shells. Maryland fired 48 16-inch shells. Mississippi fired 1 salvo of 12 14-inch shells. Pennsylvania was masked by other ships and did not fire. The American battle line had achieved the crossing of the T. Japanese forces were annihilated. Nishimura was killed aboard Yamashiro. Mogami was crippled and later sunk by aircraft. 1 destroyer escaped. The Southern Force ceased to exist. This was the last battleship surface action in history. After Surigao Strait, battleships never again engaged each other with guns. Aircraft carriers had assumed the decisive role. Battleships became fire support platforms for amphibious operations. But at Surigao Strait, for 27 minutes, battleship fought battleship as they had for 400 years. And West Virginia led the line. The ship that had been sunk at Pearl Harbor destroyed the enemy that had tried to destroy her. After Surigao Strait, West Virginia remained in the Philippines. She provided fire support for operations at Mindoro in December 1944. She supported landings at Lingayen Gulf in January 1945. Her 16-inch guns bombarded Japanese positions for hours. The shells demolished fortifications, destroyed bunkers, cratered runways. The firepower was devastating. In February 1945, West Virginia deployed to Iwo Jima. She arrived February 16 for 3 days before the landings. She bombarded Japanese positions, Mount Suribachi, the beaches, blockhouses, artillery positions. The 16-inch guns fired over 1,000 shells. The bombardment was continuous. The island was saturated with high explosive. On February 19th, Marines landed. West Virginia remained offshore providing fire support. When Marines called for fire, West Virginia delivered it. Targets were engaged within minutes of request. The accuracy was exceptional. The support was critical. On April 1, 1945, West Virginia arrived off Okinawa. She joined the massive fire support fleet bombarding the island before and during the landings. Her mission was identical to Iwo Jima: destroy Japanese defenses, support ground forces, remain on station for weeks if necessary. She fired over 2,000 shells during the Okinawa campaign. The gun barrels wore out. They were replaced at sea using shipboard cranes. New barrels were brought from supply ships. The work took 48 hours per gun. Then firing resumed. On April 1, 1945, while off Okinawa, a kamikaze struck West Virginia. A Japanese aircraft loaded with explosives dove onto the ship. The plane struck near the superstructure. The explosion killed 4 men and wounded several dozen. Fires erupted. Damage control parties extinguished them. The ship remained operational. The kamikaze had hit, but failed to achieve decisive damage. West Virginia continued her fire support mission. She remained off Okinawa through June. On August 15, 1945, Japan surrendered. West Virginia was off Okinawa when the announcement came. The crew celebrated cautiously. They had survived. The war was over. But the magnitude of what had been accomplished was still sinking in. 4 years of war, thousands of miles, dozens of operations, hundreds of shells fired. They had started at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. They ended victorious. West Virginia entered Tokyo Bay on August 29, 1945. She anchored near USS Missouri. On September 2nd, the Japanese instrument of surrender was signed aboard Missouri. West Virginia's crew could see the ceremony. They were witnesses to the end. The ship that had been sunk at the beginning of the war was present at its conclusion. The symbolism was perfect. After the surrender, West Virginia participated in Operation Magic Carpet. She transported American servicemen from Pacific bases back to the United States. 3 round trips between Pearl Harbor and the West Coast. Each trip carried over 1,000 men home. By January 1946, the mission was complete. West Virginia returned to Puget Sound. On January 9, 1947, West Virginia was decommissioned. She was placed in the Pacific Reserve Fleet at Bremerton. She remained there for 12 years. In 1959, the Navy determined she was no longer needed. She was sold for scrap in August of 1959. The scrapping occurred at Todd Shipyards in Seattle. By December 1959, West Virginia no longer existed. 36 years of service. Sunk once. Raised. Rebuilt. Fought. Victorious. Scrapped. Portions of West Virginia were preserved. The ship's bell is displayed at the West Virginia State Capitol in Charleston. One of her 16-inch guns is mounted at the West Virginia State Museum. The ship's nameplate is at the Huntington Museum of Art. A memorial plaque is installed at Pearl Harbor. These fragments remember the ship. The story of West Virginia is extraordinary because the transformation was so complete. Ships damaged at Pearl Harbor were repaired and returned to service. Arizona was lost completely. Oklahoma was refloated but not repaired. But West Virginia, California, and Tennessee were not merely repaired, they were rebuilt. They emerged from reconstruction as modern battleships incorporating technology that had not existed when they were originally designed. They were faster, better armed, better protected, and more capable than when new. West Virginia's reconstruction cost approximately $28 million. This compared to the original construction cost of approximately $24 million in 1923. Essentially, the Navy paid for the ship twice, but the alternative was building a new battleship. A new Iowa-class battleship cost $110 million. Reconstructing West Virginia cost 1/4 as much and produced a ship that, while not as capable as Iowa, was adequate for fire support and battle line operations. The economics justified reconstruction. The salvage and reconstruction also demonstrated American industrial capacity. West Virginia was sunk December 7, 1941. She was refloated May 17, 1942. She departed Pearl Harbor April 7, 1943. She completed reconstruction July 1944. She engaged Japanese forces October 1944. From sinking to combat readiness took 34 months. During this period, the United States built hundreds of warships. The salvage of West Virginia was accomplished simultaneously with massive new construction. No other nation could have achieved this. The technical achievement was equally remarkable, salvaging a ship that had been torpedoed 7 times, bombed twice, burned for 24 hours, and sat on the harbor bottom for 5 months was unprecedented. The divers who patched torpedo holes, the salvage crews who pumped compartments, the shipyard workers who rebuilt the entire ship. They accomplished something extraordinary. They created a modern battleship from a wreck. But the human dimension is most significant. West Virginia had a crew of approximately 1,500 at Pearl Harbor. 106 died in the attack. 66 died trapped in sealed compartments. 40 died from immediate effects of torpedoes and bombs. The survivors were scattered to other assignments. When West Virginia recommissioned, she had an almost entirely new crew. Most men who served on her in 1944 had not been aboard in 1941. They were strangers to the ship. But they inherited her history. They knew what she represented. They understood they were sailing a ship that had been destroyed and reborn. The crew flew the same flag that had flown on December 7th. The ship carried the same bell. She bore the same name and hull number. She was the same ship despite being rebuilt completely. This continuity mattered. It connected the ship to her past. It honored the men who died. It demonstrated that destruction is not final. That defeat can be overcome. That resurrection is possible. At 03:52 hours on October 25, 1944, West Virginia fired the first American battleship salvo at the Battle of Surigao Strait. The shells struck Yamashiro. The Japanese battleship burned and sank. Revenge was achieved. Not revenge in the sense of hatred or cruelty. Revenge in the sense of justice. The ship that had been destroyed was destroying the enemy that destroyed her. The crew that had been scattered had reformed around a rebuilt ship and was fighting back. The nation that had been attacked was now winning decisively. West Virginia was one ship among hundreds. Her individual contribution to victory was modest, but her symbolic importance was immense. She proved that Americans do not stay defeated. That determination and industrial capacity can overcome any setback. That even total destruction is not permanent if the will to rebuild exists. These lessons extended beyond naval warfare. They defined how America fought the war. Losses were accepted. Damaged ships were repaired or rebuilt. Sunk ships were raised. Destroyed facilities were reconstructed. The pace of operations never slowed. The momentum never stopped. Victory became inevitable because defeat was never accepted as final. When West Virginia anchored in Tokyo Bay on August 29, 1945, she completed a journey that began on the harbor bottom at Pearl Harbor. She had been sunk. She had been raised. She had been rebuilt. She had fought. She had won. She was present at the end. The ship that rose from the dead witnessed the enemy's surrender. The symbolism could not have been more perfect. Today, USS West Virginia exists only in fragments: a bell, a gun, a nameplate, memorial plaques, photographs. These remnants remember the ship, but they cannot convey what she meant to the men who served on her, or what she meant to a nation that watched her sink and then watched her return, or what she meant to the concept that destruction is not final if determination exists. USS West Virginia. Hull number Bravo 48. Colorado-class battleship. Commissioned December 1, 1923. Sunk December 7, 1941. Raised May 17, 1942. Rebuilt July 1944. Led the battle line at Surigao Strait, October 25, 1944. Present at the Japanese surrender, September 2, 1945. Decommissioned January 9, 1947. Scrapped 1959. She was sunk. She rose. She fought. She won. She witnessed the end. And then she was gone. But her story remains: the battleship that rose from the dead. The ship that proved that destruction is not final. The warship that demonstrated American determination, industrial capacity, and refusal to accept defeat. That was USS West Virginia. And her story is worth remembering.